vaccine. I'm still using the 21st edition. And by the end of this lecture, you should be able to, number one, identify the major types of viral hepatitis. Number two, understand their pathophysiology, the clinical course, and the diagnostic features. And lastly, appreciate the differences in prognosis and treatment among them. Excuse. So there are 5 major hepatitis viruses known to cause the acute viral hepatitis, namely hepatitis A, B, C, D, and E. All hepatitis viruses are RNA, except for hepatitis B, which is a DNA virus. You already know this in your microbiology subject. The spectrum of disease ranges from being asymptomatic, no symptoms at all, to become fulminant and even fatal acute infection. Among these, the blood-borne types, that is hepatitis B, C, and D, they are the blood-borne types, are strongly associated with liver cancer or the hepatocellular carcinoma. So, if you're asked in the exam, the only hepatitis virus that is a DNA, your answer should be hepatitis B. It is important to note that, It is important to note that these viruses do not directly damage the liver. There are studies that the clinical manifestation and outcome is associated by the immunologic response. It's the immune system. Once the infected cells is sensed by the immune system, different immune cells that includes your cytotoxic T cells attack these infected cells, causing lysis and death. Now let's move on to the pathologic changes seen in acute viral hepatitis. So the typical morphology here is a panlobular, meaning to say all the lobes of the liver is affected and infiltrated with mononuclear cells. It is accompanied by hepatocellular necrosis and Kupffer cell hyperplasia. We may also observe variable degrees of cholestasis or impairing the flow of the bile. The hallmark of liver injury here is hepatocellular degeneration and necrosis, manifested as ballooning of hepatocytes and acidophilic degeneration. It is also known as the Councilman bodies or apoptotic bodies. When there is necrosis, when the necrosis bridges between the portal tracts and central veins, we refer it to as bridging hepatic necrosis. And when there is bridging hepatic necrosis, it is an indicator of a more severe liver injury. For the signs and symptoms, clinically, acute viral hepatitis progresses through distinct phases. So there are phases. The first one is the prodromal phase, also called as the pre-icteric phase. Okay, so before the patient will have jaundice, so the pre-icteric phase. The symptoms are systemic and non-specific. That includes anorexia, nausea, vomiting, fatigue, malaise, arthralgia, myalgia, even headache, pharyngitis, coryza, and cough. Okay, they are non-specific, but that could be the first phase in this type of infection. These symptoms usually precede jaundice by 1 to 2 weeks. The appearance of your dark urine, there is dark urine and clay-colored stools 1 to 5 days before jaundice marks the transition towards the next phase. So, why do you think the urine would turn dark and the stool becomes pale? What could be the reason? Why is the urine will turn dark and the stool becomes pale? Katrina? Why would there be a colic stool and a dark urine color? Katrina? Ero?
Problem in delivering duct production.
Sorry,
Mainly, Doctor, there's a problem in the production of the bilirubin system.
the bilirubin.
Yes, so
Okay. Since if there is problem, no, very good. If there is problem in the liver, there would be an obstructed bile excretion. So if the bile is not excreted in the duodenum, that's why the stool will become pale. And since there is too much bilirubin in the blood going to the kidney, there would be bilirubinuria. So that's why the urine will turn dark and the stool becomes pale. Okay. The next phase, after the prodromal phase, with the onset of clinical jaundice, this is already the ecteric phase. Constitutional symptoms usually diminish. The patient may experience right upper quadrant discomfort and tender hepatomegaly. There is weight loss of about 2 to 2.5 kilograms, and that is common. In about 20% of cases, we may observe splenomegaly, cervical lymphadenopathy, and occasionally there is spider angioma that may appear. These findings reflect the systemic effect of hepatic inflammation and mild impairment of protein metabolism. So as you can see, not only the liver is affected in hepatitis, there are also extrahepatic manifestation. So after the ecteric phase follows the recovery phase. The recovery phase follows as the constitutional symptoms gradually disappear. However, the hepatomegaly and biochemical abnormalities may persist for 2 to 12 weeks and even longer in hepatitis B and C. By the way, you might be confused. What I'm talking now is the generalities of hepatitis, meaning from A to C, because all of them can share the same manifestation, the same signs and symptoms. Okay. However, they may vary for some factors. So complete recovery usually occurs within 1 to 2 months for hepatitis A and E. Okay, appreciate this one na. Hepatitis A and E may recover within 1 to 2 months, while 3 to 4 months in uncomplicated hepatitis B and C. Note that 95 to 99% of uncomplicated hepatitis B are self-limited, while only 15 to 20% of hepatitis C infection resolve spontaneously. Okay, so very important for this slide is that if you will acquire hepatitis B, doesn't mean that you will have it for life. Okay, appreciate that 95 to 99% is self-limited, meaning the virus will just be cleared from our body and it will not become a chronic hepatitis. So, if you were asked in the examination, which type has higher likelihood of becoming chronic? Is it B or C? Jasame Hanoyan. Higher likelihood of becoming chronic, is it hepatitis B or C? Jasa? C, correct. So that you should answer that one in the exam. So the answer is hepatitis C, more likely of becoming chronic. No? Okay. In hepatitis B, only kuan raman about 1% raman, no? But 15 to 20% self-limited for hepatitis C. The rest will become chronic. So very good, Jasa. So laboratory findings mirror the clinical phases. During the prodromal phase, there is an early rise in aminotransferases. So when we say aminotransferases, that is the ALT and AST, often reaching about 400 to 4,000 international unit per liters. Remember, the degree of enzyme elevation does not correlate with the extent of liver damage. Okay, so it doesn't mean that if you have a very high SGPT, a very high SGOT, that would mean that the severity is also high. No, okay? The aminotransferases does not reflect the extent of liver damage, though you may expect elevation, but again, its value does not reflect the extent of the liver damage. Take note of that. Okay. Bilirubin levels continue to rise even as aminotransferase begin to fall. There is transient leukopenia and lymphopenia. So that is a decreased neutrophil and lymphocytes count that may occur, and later on will be followed by relative lymphocytosis because this is a viral infection. If there is prolongation of prothrombin time, the pro time, it indicates a severe hepatic synthetic defect and extensive hepatocellular necrosis, and it is a poor prognostic sign. Okay, so that's why in my groups in the clinics, I emphasize to them that the liver function test would include, number one is the prothrombin time, because as you know, the vitamin K dependent clotting factor is synthesized in the liver. Okay, so and prolongation of pro time is a poor prognostic sign. So this table shows a summary of features of viral causes of acute hepatitis, showing the morphology, the mode of transmission, the antigen, antibodies, and what to order to diagnose the specific viral infection. The incubation period, there's onset, clinical severity, prognosis, prophylaxis and therapy. Okay, so now we will briefly discuss each viral agent. Earlier, we discussed the generalities of hepatitis. Now we will start with the specific viral agent, and we will start with hepatitis A. The incubation period of hepatitis A is 15 to 45 days with a mean of about 30 days. Diagnosis is confirmed. Okay, take note if nagani confirmed. Confirmatory is by IgM, anti-HAV antibodies, while anti-HAV IgG indicates a past infection or recovery. In hepatitis A, most cases result in full recovery without sequelae. Okay, so if you suspect someone with hepatitis A and you really want to diagnose, you better order the IgM anti-HAV. Do not order IgG, no? Because IgG is the past infection. An acute infection is positive when there is detected IgM anti-HAV. Okay, IgM is recent, while IgG is past or already with recovery. So, prognosis for hepatitis A. There are two notable complications. Number one is relapsing hepatitis. Okay, relapsing hepatitis occurring weeks to months after apparent recovery. And next is cholestatic hepatitis, or this is characterized by prolonged jaundice and pruritus. However, these complications are both self-limited, and hepatitis A virus does not progress to chronic liver disease. Okay, take note of this, it does not progress to chronic liver disease. For the treatment, okay, treatment and prophylaxis of hepatitis A, it is mainly supportive. So when you say supportive, you manage the symptoms. If there's vomiting, if there's signs of dehydration, then you replace with fluids. If there's abdominal pain, then you give probably hyoscine, no, or Buscopan. So it's all supportive care. If there is fever, give paracetamol, because your immune system will eventually clear out the hepatitis A virus, though it may take phases before it will be cleared from the body. But if you are exposed to hepatitis A, then post-exposure prophylaxis with immune globulin at 0.02 ml per kilogram is recommended within 2 weeks after the exposure. For travelers, if you travel to endemic areas, those vary depending on the duration of your travel. For trips that is less than 3 months, then an immune globulin is given at 0.02 ml per kilogram. But if you plan to stay longer, you will be given 0.06 ml per kilogram every 4 to 6 months. Okay, so that is post-exposure prophylaxis. while the pre-exposure prophylaxis is achieved with the hepatitis A vaccine, ideally administered 4 weeks prior to expected exposure. So, if you already have the pre-exposure prophylaxis, then no need to receive the post-exposure prophylaxis if you go to those endemic areas because you already have the antibodies for hepatitis A. So that concludes our discussion on hepatitis A. Let's now proceed with hepatitis B. So it's the most clinically significant type due its potential for chronicity and hepatocellular carcinoma. So hepatitis B virus or HBV, one of the most clinically important causes of viral hepatitis. Hepatitis B is enveloped, double-shelled, spherical DNA virus belonging to the Hepadnavirus family under the Flaviviridae. Transmission, it occurs mainly through percutaneous inoculation, meaning through exposure to infected blood or body fluids. HBsAg or the HBs antigen, surface antigen, has been identified in almost every body fluid, and that includes the blood, the semen, saliva, and even breast milk. The chronic carriers of Hep B virus serve as the main reservoir of infection in the community. So we get this from those chronic carriers. So what are the common ways that hepatitis B transmitted? So it is through sexual contact, through blood transfusion, needle sharing, and perinatal transmission. The incubation of hepatitis B ranges from 30 to 180 days with a mean of 60 to 90 days. To diagnose hepatitis B, we look at the serologic markers. Take note of this. In acute infection, we detect the HB surface antigen or HBs. So S there is surface antigen. Together with anti-Hep B core and IgM. So that is for acute infection. Positive HBsAg and positive anti-HBc IgM. Okay, that is an acute IgM. While in chronic infection, HBsAg is also still positive, but this time an anti-HBc IgG. So you would know that it is already chronic. During the recovery, because as we said earlier, majority of cases of acute hepatitis B will recover. So during recovery, anti-HBs, anti-HBc, and sometimes anti-HBe will appear. Remember, the presence of HBsAg beyond 6 months defines chronic hepatitis B infection. Okay, so beyond 6 months that you will detect the surface antigen, it will tell us that there is already a chronic Hep B infection. This one, the serologic and virologic markers. So let's review each marker in more details. Again, the HBsAg or the surface antigen. It is the first virologic marker to appear, usually 1 to 12 weeks after the exposure. Then the anti-HBs. The anti-HBs appear after the disappearance of your HBsAg, and it confers protective immunity. So if there is anti-HBs, there is already a protective antibody. Then the hepatitis B core antigen. So the HBsAg is not detectable in serum. So among all these serologic and virologic marker, the HB core antigen is not detectable in serum. Meaning if you get blood, you cannot order na HB core antigen because it's not detectable in the blood. Because this one is an intracellular antigen, meaning found only in infected hepatocytes. While an anti-HBc, so this one, anti-HBc, can be found in the serum. It appears 1 to 2 weeks after the HBsAg and may persist for years. Again, its IgM form indicates a recent infection, while the IgG form indicates a past or chronic infection. The last one, the HBeAg, it appears shortly after the HBsAg, and it serves as a marker of viral replication and infectivity. So meaning to say, if the HBeAg is positive, the patient is highly infective or highly contagious. So if you were asked in an exam that if a patient is HBsAg positive and HBeAg positive, both the surface antigen and the envelope antigen positive, what does that tell us? Okay, so it could mean that the patient is positive and is highly infectious. Again, HBe meaning E infectious. So highly infectious is if positive with HBeAg. So this table in Harrison shows the commonly encountered serologic patterns of hepatitis B infection. That if you are given a hepatitis B panel result, it is easier for you to interpret using this table. So for example, the first one in the table, positive for surface antigen and positive for envelope antigen and positive for anti-IgM, Hep B, core IgM, then that is an acute infection that is high infectivity. While looking at the last, in the table, the patient is positive with anti-HBs. So if you are vaccinated, you have received the primary series vaccination against hepatitis B, then you would expect an anti-HBs positive. Okay, so this would surely come out in the exam, this table. You will be given a case with a specific positive or negative serologic patterns. Then identify what is the, or interpret what is the diagnosis. So we said earlier that if the surface antigen remains detectable for more than 6 months, it is already a chronic hepatitis B infection. IgG, anti-HBC, is also present if it is a chronic infection. And also, HBV DNA can be detected in the serum. The HBV DNA is a quantitative marker of viral replication. In fact, we use the HBV DNA to decide whether to treat the patient or not, depending on the specific viral count in the PCR. Okay, HBV DNA is done through your PCR. So HBV DNA can also be found not just in the liver, but also in the extrahepatic sites such as the lymph nodes, the bone marrow, the spleen, lymphocytes, and pancreas, highlighting the systemic reach of the virus. So again, I repeat it, if there is persistence of HBsAg beyond 6 months, that is chronic infection. Okay, so for some important details, you may wonder that I'll keep on repeating them so that you will remember and understand. Okay, so regarding pathogenesis, this is the key concept. I already said it earlier, but I will repeat it. The hepatitis B virus is not directly cytopathic. Okay, so it does not directly damage the liver cells. There is liver injury because it is immune mediated rather than due to the direct viral destruction. The viral antigens, the hepatitis B core antigen and the hepatitis B envelope antigen, they act as the target of the cytotoxic T lymphocytes, which then attack the infected hepatocytes. Okay, so it's the cytotoxic T lymphocytes. Therefore, the severity of liver injury depends on the host's immune system, not on the viral load itself. So if you're asked what determines the degree of liver damage in hepatitis B, it's not the virus, it's the immune system. I hope that's clear. Infection with hepatitis B in the neonatal period has unique characteristic, okay, in the neonatal period because of immature immune response. Neonates, they exhibit, the newborn, they exhibit a high degree of immunologic tolerance to the virus. Consequently, they do not develop acute hepatic illness, but rather become chronic carriers, often for life. So chronic infection acquired perinatally can eventually culminate in cirrhosis and hepatocellular carcinoma. The likelihood of perinatal transmission strongly correlates with the presence of hepatitis B envelope antigen in the mother. So in contrast, infection that is acquired later in life usually elicits a robust immune response, resulting in acute illness only and rare chronicity and lower cancer risk. Meaning to say, in this slide, if you get the hepatitis B from a vertical transmission, meaning to say, you got the virus from the mother during the delivery and during the breastfeeding, it is more prone to become chronic or more prone for the patient to have liver cancer than if you got the hepatitis B later on in life. So if you would notice, if you have met patients with hepatitis B, with chronic hepatitis B, majority of them, they got it while they were still young, no? Especially long time ago, if you were not born in the hospital or in a training institution, even if the mother is positive with hepatitis B, the baby or the newborn is not given the immunoglobulin against the hepatitis B. So they get the virus, and then later on during adulthood, it will become chronic. So it's safe. It's better to get the virus in adulthood rather than getting it during the neonatal period. The prognosis for most adult, as what I've said, is excellent. Okay, 95 to 99% of previously healthy adults recover completely. So if you will meet someone with hepatitis B, no, in the clinic, in the OPD, you just have to order laboratory tests and reassure the patient not to worry, because it might just be an acute hepatitis B infection, and the recovery is excellent, or the prognosis is excellent. However, there are certain features that suggest a complicated or severe course. So what are these features? Number one, if there is advanced age, mga tigulang, or serious comorbidities. Also, if there are clinical findings like ascites, peripheral edema, hepatic encephalopathy, and if there are laboratory findings like prolonged ProTime, low albumin, hypoglycemia, and marked hyperbilirubinemia. As you can see, all these are the liver function tests. Remember that if you have ascites, if you have peripheral edema, that would mean that there is decreased synthesis of your albumin, and albumin is synthesized in the liver. And why would there be hepatic encephalopathy? It's because of the ammonia level, no? Ammonia level that is not processed by the liver to become urea. Also, hypoglycemia, because as you know, some glucose through the glycogen is stored in the liver. And hyperbilirubinemia, because the liver processes the bilirubin. So if you see this manifestation, so that would mean that the liver is really failing. This is the liver function test. The fatality rate in acute hepatitis B is approximately just 1%, but higher with those with underlying illness. The most feared complication of acute hepatitis B is the fulminant hepatitis. Fulminant hepatitis is characterized by massive hepatic necrosis. Diba? When you hear about necrosis, it's cell death, no? But it's not the program cell death, it's not apoptosis, it's necrosis, okay? That is a pathologic cell death, not the physiologic. More than 50% of fulminant hepatitis cases are due to hepatitis B and hepatitis D co-infection. This occurs primarily in older adults and in patients with chronic liver disease with a mortality rate exceeding 80%. Imagine the very high mortality rate, 80%, especially if there is co-infection with hepatitis D virus. Clinical clues, no, how would you know if there is fulminant hepatitis? You may find, number one, rapidly shrinking liver size, because of course there is necrosis, no? So you would expect the liver to shrink. Rising bilirubin levels, marked prolongation of bro time. There would be confusion, disorientation, and somnolence that would indicate encephalopathy. And the late manifestations are ascites, cerebral edema, GI bleeding, sepsis, and eventually multi-organ failure. Early recognition is critical. Once encephalopathy sets in, then the prognosis is so bad. No? Encephalopathy, wala. Batik. Prognosis is grave or bad already. Are you still with me, guys?
Yes, Doc.
Yes po,
Okay.
Doc.
We will continue. I know this is a boring topic, but try to listen lang, ha? Sige. Complications. Okay. Another possible outcome is the progression to chronic hepatitis B. This is what I said earlier, no? Progression to chronic hepatitis B, or could also be the liver cancer or hepatocellular carcinoma. So there are indicators of progression from acute to chronic, and that includes, number one, so you would know if there is progression. You would see persistent anorexia. There will be weight loss and hepatomegaly. You might be confused, ha? If there is fulminant hepatitis, then you would see a rapidly shrinking liver. Kay fulminant man, a very fast ang necrosis. But from acute to chronic, initially, you would see hepatomegaly. Okay? It might sound confusing, no? Fulminant, shrinking of the liver. But if it's not fulminant, the usual course of acute to chronic, then initially, you would see hepatomegaly. Okay? Another indicator of progression from acute to chronic is the bridging or multilobar hepatic necrosis on biopsy. Okay? You can find it on biopsy and not on the liver ultrasound. You would know that there is progression from acute to chronic if there is failure of your SGPT, SGOT, and bilirubin level to normalize within 6 to 12 months. Also, if there is persistence of the envelope antigen for more than 3 months, and as what I've said earlier, the surface antigen for more than 6 months. So most likely, it is progression from acute to chronic. Chronic hepatitis B infection is a major risk factor for hepatocellular carcinoma, even in the absence of cirrhosis. Okay, the usual course man good, no? Sa mga liver problem, usually it will start with mga infection, and then fibrosis, and then cirrhosis, and then liver cancer. But in hepatitis B, no, even without cirrhosis, it can go directly to hepatocellular carcinoma. Okay? That's why it is important to screen the chronic hepatitis B virus for hepatocellular carcinoma. Okay, because hepatitis B virus itself has oncogenic potential, no? Even independent of cirrhosis. So, mga Hep B patient, ato-adyo na silang screen, no? We do ultrasound to see if there are nodules. If it's chronic, we can order the alpha-fetoprotein or the AFP. That is a marker of a possibility of liver or hepatocellular carcinoma. So you screen them, mga chronic Hep B infection. Now we go to the treatment. So for acute hepatitis B, again, treatment is generally supportive, still supportive, just like hepatitis A. Because again, recovery occurs in nearly 99% of cases. The antiviral therapy is usually not required, except in severe cases or fulminant hepatitis, where your nucleoside analog, such as your entecavir, entecavir at a dose of 0.5 milligram once daily, or tenofovir at 300 milligrams once daily can be used. But again, that is in severe or fulminant cases. For pre-exposure prophylaxis, it is given through hepatitis B vaccine as 3-deltoid IM intramuscular injection at 0, 1, and 6 months. And I hope everyone is already vaccinated against Hep B before you go to your clinical or hospital rotation. You need to be protected. Okay. Post-exposure prophylaxis. So if there is pre-exposure, there is post-exposure prophylaxis, and that involves giving of your Hep B immunoglobulin at 0.06 ml per kilogram that is given together with the Hep B vaccine series. Meaning to say, if you're exposed, if you have a needle prick injury, then you are given the post-exposure prophylaxis. For perinatal prevention, as what we discussed earlier, the newborns of mother positive of hepatitis B should receive, they should receive 0.5 ml of the immunoglobulin intramuscularly immediately after birth, okay? Because they are being exposed during the delivery. So immediately after birth, give injection. And this will be followed by the full hepatitis B vaccine series, okay? So for the immediate protection, we need the immunoglobulin. But to further increase the protection, then we give the vaccine series. How about the booster? Okay? Booster doses are usually not routinely required. Dili ra gid sila routinely required, except for immunocompromised individuals. Okay, so some would get titer. If they still have titer for the hepatitis B, then they may not get the injection. But in majority of the cases, if you have completed the 3 doses, you do not need a booster. Except again, if you're immunocompromised, because you cannot really produce enough antibodies if you're immunocompromised. For example, cancer patients on chemo, HIV patients, and other patients with immune system problem. So I guess that concludes our discussion on hepatitis B. Again, one of the most complex yet preventable cause of liver disease worldwide. Preventable just with vaccination. So if your family is not vaccinated yet, especially in your parents, the elderly, I'm sure they're not vaccinated yet, then might as well give them the primary series of vaccination. It's actually cheap, but can prevent you from having chronic Hep B or cirrhosis or even liver cancer. So vaccines can really help. Now we'll discuss hepatitis C, another blood-borne virus, but with different outcomes and different challenges. For a while, I'll drink water. Okay, hepatitis C. It is an enveloped, single-stranded RNA that belongs to Flaviviridae genus Hepasivirus. Transmission occurs mainly through percutaneous, just like the hepatitis B, most commonly from contaminated blood or blood products, also from needle sharing, mga drug addicts, or unsafe medical practices. Previously, hepatitis C was labeled as non-A and non-B hepatitis before it was formally identified. The incubation period is 15 to 160 days with a mean of about 50 days. Diagnostics, for you to diagnose hepatitis C, it includes anti-HCV antibodies and HCV RNA detection. Okay, so only 2, Unlike in hepatitis B, there's a lot. But for hepatitis C, for you to diagnose, you can just order anti-HCV antibodies. And this is for screening. For confirmatory, you get the HCV RNA detection. Okay, so in the exam, if you are asked the gold standard to diagnose Hep C infection, it should be, your answer is HCV RNA detection, not the HCV antibodies. Okay, HCV antibodies is for the screening, while for the gold standard, RNA detection. I hope that's clear. Routine screening of blood donors has significantly reduced this hepatitis C virus-related transfusion, but it has not eliminated the hepatitis C entirely. The virus is transmitted through blood transfusions and organ transplant, injection drug use, even in the hemodialysis unit. Less commonly through sexual contact or perinatal transmission, but could also be. Hepatitis C accounts for roughly 40% of chronic liver disease. That's so high, 40%. And it's the most frequent indication of liver transplantation. Okay, so in the exam or in even quiz bowl, mga inani, this type of question, the most frequent indication for liver transplantation, it's the hepatitis C infection. Thus, the hepatitis C represents a major public health challenge, not due to acute infection severity, but because of its tendency to become chronic. The clinical presentation of acute hepatitis C, in an acute hepatitis C is often mild or even no symptoms at all. In fact, most patients are not jaundiced. They are anicteric during the acute phase. The laboratory findings show an episodic or fluctuating pattern of aminotransferase elevation, which may persist or recur for months. Again, diagnosis is confirmed by HCV RNA, later by the anti-HCV antibodies. Recovery from hepatitis C is rare, and progression to chronic infection is the rule rather than the exception. The acute disease is generally less severe than the hepatitis B. Okay, take note, it is prone to becoming chronic, but the acute disease is less severe than the hepatitis B, and fatalities or death is uncommon in hepatitis C. But if you are asked between hepatitis B and C, which is more likely to progress to chronic, as what I've asked earlier, it's the hepatitis C. Now let's look at the long-term consequence of hepatitis C virus infection. Approximately 85 to 90% of infection will become chronic. So high. Most of these patients will remain asymptomatic for years. No symptoms, no? They're just positive but no symptoms at all. But 20 to 50% will develop cirrhosis within 10 to 20 years. So imagine if this is left untreated, it will develop cirrhosis within 10 to 20 years. There are several factors that increase the risk of progression to chronic liver disease. It includes, number one, if you're an older age or advanced age, a longer duration of infection, if there is immunosuppression, if there is history of heavy alcohol use, if there is fatty liver, or if there is co-infection with other viruses such as Hep B or HIV. The chronic hepatitis C infection can also lead to hepatocellular carcinoma, just like the hepatitis B, marking early detection and management. Okay, so very important, early detection and management of hepatitis C infection. So for the treatment, management of acute hepatitis C involves timing and patient selection. Okay? The antiviral therapy is usually delayed. It is delayed for at least 12 to 16 weeks and sometimes up to 6 months to allow for spontaneous recovery, although this occurs rarely. The more likely to recover spontaneously include the women, patients with a lower viral load, those younger age of infection, and those with IL-28BCC genetic haplotype. The treatment candidates typically include those healthcare workers exposed to patients positive of hepatitis C and the injection drug users. The standard regimen for hepatitis E is pegylated interferon given once weekly and ribavirin as adjunct therapy. So you might be confused, no? What is the purpose of delaying the antiviral therapy? I said earlier nga, i-delay lang muna siya for at least 12 to 16 weeks. Okay? The purpose of delaying it is to allow chance for spontaneous viral clearance before committing to a prolonged treatment. That's why initially we observe it. But again, depending on the case. That's why I said earlier, it involves timing and patient selection. But most likely, if you think this will become chronic, then start the treatment immediately. Okay, so that's it for hepatitis C. So we're about to finish. So moving on, now on hepatitis D or HDV, also known as the Delta agent. So HDV virus is a defective single-stranded RNA. Okay, so don't be confused. There's only one DNA in hepatitis B. Though hepatitis B coexists with hepatitis B, but this one is a single-stranded RNA, not DNA, a defective one. And it requires the helper function of hepatitis B virus to replicate. Transmission, still the same with Hep B, percutaneous through blood exposure or sexual contact. And the duration and severity of hepatitis B virus infection are determined by the presence and activity of hepatitis B virus infection. So if you're asked what kind of virus is hepatitis D, so it's not an independent virus, but a defective virus. Defective because it depends on the hepatitis B virus. The incubation period of hepatitis D ranges from 30 to 180 days with a mean of about 60 to 90 days. Diagnostic markers include anti-HDV antibody and anti-HDV RNA detection by PCR. So here, it's easy, just like hepatitis C, there are only two markers, unlike the hepatitis B. In Hep B, Hep D co-infection, both the anti-HBC and anti-HDV are detectable. So you would know that there is co-infection. Recovery, if there is recovery, it is indicated by appearance of anti-HBs and anti-HDV. Okay, so if there is recovery, positive na ang anti-HBs and anti-HDV antibodies. Because hepatitis D depends on hepatitis B vaccination. Okay, giving of vaccine against hepatitis B also prevents hepatitis D. Okay, it's a key preventive strategy. So just by giving Hep B vaccine, you will be able to protect the patient against Hep D infection. For the epidemiology, the hepatitis D infection is more common in certain parts of the world. It is endemic, no? Endemic in Mediterranean countries like the North America, Southern Europe, and the Middle East. While in the non-endemic area, it is usually seen among those with injection drug use, in hemophiliacs, no, patients with hemophilia that would receive contaminated blood products during the transfusion. But also in hepatitis D, there is non-percutaneous transmission. Okay? Non-percutaneous transmission may also occur through close contact among Hep B virus infected individual, though this one is less common, the non-percutaneous transmission. We'll talk about the pathogenesis and the clinical course. Infection with hepatitis D can occur in two settings. Number one, very important though, is what we call the co-infection. Okay? The co-infection meaning hepatitis B and hepatitis D are acquired simultaneously. Okay, so co-infection, we acquire them simultaneously. Okay, while when we say super infection, the hepatitis D infects a person already with chronic hepatitis B. Okay, so co-infection, you acquire them all together, the B and the D. Super infection, you already have the chronic hep B and suddenly you acquire the hepatitis D, and that is a super infection. If this is a co-infection, it usually results in acute, more severe illness. But it often resolves once the hep B virus is cleared. Excuse me. While when we say super infection, no, again, super infection, chronic hep B, and then you acquired the hepatitis D. That's super infection. Super infection, on the other hand, leads to clinical deterioration and high risk of chronicity. Chronic hep B infection can support indefinite hepatitis D replication, resulting in progressive chronic hepatitis and cirrhosis. So if you were asked, which is more dangerous? Is it the co-infection or the super infection? So the answer is super infection because it increased the likelihood of fulminant death. Fulminant hepatitis and even death. Okay, so more dangerous, super infection. Prognosis. Patient with simultaneous hep B and hep D infection generally have no significant increase in mortality compared to hepatitis B virus alone. However, patients with hep D superinfection on top of chronic hep B have much higher risk of fulminant hepatitis and death, with mortality exceeding 20%. Okay, that is superinfection. Complications include massive hepatic necrosis, progressive chronic hepatitis, and cirrhosis. So Hep D, treatment again is largely supportive, with PEG interferon as the main antiviral option. Liver transplantation may be necessary if there are end-stage cases, kind of mga fulminant cases na you need liver transplantation for them. Preventive measures again include vaccination with hepatitis B, as no vaccine currently exists for hepatitis D. Wala pa, no vaccine yet for hepatitis D. Supportive management include the protein restriction. No? Protein restriction. Can I call Janelle Malaluan? Why do you think, Janelle, that we would restrict the protein in case of this type of hepatitis? Why would we restrict the protein, Janelle Malaluan? I hope you're still with us, Janelle. Janelle, are you still there? Wala si Janelle? Ay, absent man si Janelle. How about si Giovanni Lapis? Giovanni?
Doc, kanang nag-chat po si Janelle po, Doc.
Ha? Nag-chat siya?
Yes po, Doc.
Okay. Why can she not open her mic and answer? Janelle? Why would there be protein restriction? Why would you restrict the patient from eating more protein? Sige. We'll continue na lang. Wa man si Janelle. Okay. So you would restrict protein because, as you know, that protein catabolism, especially in the GI, the byproduct is ammonia. Okay, and ammonia in the liver is ammonia in the liver will become urea to be excreted in the urine. So if you have a failing liver, then you cannot process the ammonia. So ammonia will build up in the blood, eventually going to the brain, causing encephalopathy. Okay, so mag-enseph. The patient can have encephalopathy. So that's why you need to restrict the protein intake. Also, part of the supportive treatment is prophylactic antibiotics and avoidance of glucocorticoids, which are ineffective. If you're asked in the exam, what is the best prevention against hepatitis D? The answer is vaccination against hepatitis B. Okay, I hope that's clear. Finally, we will discuss about hepatitis E. Okay, last na lang. We're almost done. It's the fifth major cause of viral hepatitis. So Hep E is a non-enveloped icosahedral single-stranded RNA virus belonging to the Hepiviridae genus Hepivirus. It is transmitted through the enteric route, okay, meaning it is spread via the fecal-oral pathway, similar to your hepatitis A, okay? Hepatitis E infection commonly occurs as epidemics in developing regions where the sanitation is poor or as sporadic cases in endemic areas. So if you're asking the exam, which two hepatitis are transmitted enterically? Okay, so enteric transmission, it's hepatitis A and E. Okay, while percutaneous, B, C, and D. I hope that's clear. Okay, the virus of hepatitis E is detected in stool, in bile, and liver tissues of the infected individuals. It is excreted in the stool during the late incubation period, which facilitates person-to-person transmission through the contaminated food and water. So, after going to the toilet, not washing the hands properly, okay, touching the food, and then other person will eat the contaminated food, then boom, that is the transmission of your hepatitis E, fecal oral. In most cases, hepatitis E is self-limited, but there are certain population, particularly the pregnant women, they are at very high risk of severe disease. Okay, the pregnant women. The incubation period ranges from 14 to 60 days with a mean of about 40 days. Okay, so the typical mode of transmission again for hepatitis E is fecal oral route through the contaminated food or water. The diagnosis of hepatitis E is made by detecting an IgM and IgG anti-hepatitis E antibodies or Hep E RNA in the serum. Hello? Sorry, na-disconnect ko. But we're almost done. Actually, we're almost done. I don't know, something happened sa akong slide. And see, I'm now using my phone. I'll try if I can share screen. Hello, can you see my screen?
Yes,
Yes.
Doc. Yes, Doc.
Okay, asa naman ta? Where did I stop?
Mao pa'y pag-start sa hepatitis E, Doc.
Or na-finish na ko ang D?
Yes, Doc.
Slide 37.
Wait, ha? Wala, ilagay na ko siya ma-play. Sige, pero kana makita ra ninyo ang kanang happy? Makita ra ninyo?
Yes
Yes.
po, Doc.
Sige, kay I'm only using my phone, so I don't know how to present it in PowerPoint. Okay, anyway, we'll just continue, ha? So for hepatitis E, so we will start with hepatitis E. Okay. So again, the hepatitis E virus, it is non-enveloped icosahedral single-stranded RNA belonging to the Hepiviridae, the genus Hepivirus. It is transmitted through the enteric route, meaning the fecal-oral pathway, similar to your hepatitis A. And Hep E infection commonly occurs in epidemics in developing region where sanitation is poor or as sporadic cases in some endemic areas. So again, two types of hepatitis that are transmitted enterically, it's Hep A and Hep E. Okay. The virus hepatitis E has been detected in the stool, the bile, and the liver tissues of infected individuals. It is excreted in the stool during the late incubation period, which facilitates person-to-person transmission through the contaminated food and water. So meaning an infected person with Hep E, after going to the toilet, no, touching the anal part or the fecal material, and eventually not washing his hand properly and touching the contaminated food, and then the contaminated food will be consumed by other person, then there would be transmission of your hepatitis E. But in most cases, the hepatitis E is self-limited. But there are certain population, particularly the pregnant women. No, the pregnant women are very high risk of severe disease. The incubation period ranges from 14 to 60 days with a mean of about 40 days. Again, the typical route of transmission is fecal oral through contaminated food and water. The diagnosis of hepatitis E is made by detecting the IgM and the IgG antibodies, okay? Or the hepatitis E RNA in the serum or stool. The presence of the IgM indicates a recent or acute infection, while IgG denotes past recovery, past exposure, or recovery already. In patients that are immunocompromised, individuals, they need PCR testing for the detection of Hep E RNA, since antibody response may be weak or absent. Okay, meaning to say, immunocompromised HIV patient, you may not expect the development of the IgM or IgG because the immune system is weak. Rather, you get PCR testing, okay, for the Hep E RNA. In endemic areas, hepatitis E should be suspected in any case of acute hepatitis with recent travel or exposure to contaminated water. For the prognosis, most patient has an excellent prognosis. Okay, fulminant hepatitis may occur, but in just about 1 to 2% of cases. However, as I said earlier, in pregnant women, especially during the third trimester, the case fatality can reach up to 10 to 20% due to massive hepatic necrosis. Other complications may include cholestatic hepatitis, relapsing hepatitis, or in rare cases, the chronic infection in immunocompromised patient such as an organ transplant recipient. But why do you think the pregnant, no? Why do you think the pregnant women are particularly vulnerable to severe hepatitis E? What is the reason if you're being asked in an exam? Okay? The answer for that is it's because of the hormonal and immune modulation that occurs during pregnancy, which impairs the viral clearance. Okay? The treatment for hepatitis C is generally supportive. Okay, hydration is very important as patients recover spontaneously. But in cases of fulminant hepatitis or severe infection, ribavirin has shown benefit. Okay? The typical dose of ribavirin is 600 milligram twice daily or approximately 15 milligram per kilogram per day. However, ribavirin is teratogenic and therefore contraindicated in pregnant patients. So that's why the treatment of hepatitis E in pregnant patients is challenging because the only medication intended for fulminant hepatitis is teratogenic. That's why the fatality is really high. So for hepatitis E, prevention remains the best strategy. So what type of prevention? Improved sanitation, safe drinking water, and possibly vaccination. Though the commercial vaccines are still limited in availability. In fact, I haven't seen a Hep E vaccine here in the Philippines. So let's emphasize the prevention aspects of hepatitis E is ensure safe water supply and proper disposal of sewage, proper hand hygiene and safe food handling practices, and vaccinations against Hep E has been developed and tested in certain countries, but again, not yet widely available. Giving of your passive immunization or immunoglobulin remains uncertain and it's not routinely recommended. Thus, the public health measures remain the cornerstone of hepatitis E prevention, especially in outbreak-prone areas. Okay, so I think that's it for hepatitis E. Let's have a short summary. Okay, let's summarize the key points of today's lecture. Okay, there are 5 major hepatitis viruses: A, B, C, D, and E. All are RNA except for Hep B. Okay, which is a DNA virus. So it acts in a retro, no? Retro ang pag-act sa hepatitis B, the DNA virus. Hepatitis A and E are enterically transmitted, meaning oral fecal, and they are self-limited, rarely becoming chronic. While hepatitis B, C, and D are blood-borne and have a higher risk of chronicity and hepatocellular carcinoma. Hepatitis B infection is immune-mediated, not directly cytopathic. So it's not the virus damaging the cells, but an immune response. Hepatitis C is notorious for becoming chronic in up to 90% of cases. Hepatitis D requires Hep B virus as helper virus. And hepatitis E, though generally self-limited, but can be fatal in pregnancy. So those are the key points for today's lecture. Remember that early detection, prevention through vaccination, and public health intervention are crucial in reducing the global burden of viral hepatitis. Okay, so that's it for this morning. And the next topic, on Friday, we will talk about chronic viral hepatitis and the drug-induced liver injury. Okay, so before we end, do you have any questions? Zoom. Do you have any questions, guys?
None so far, Doc.
Okay, sige. So, after this, try to read lang your Harrisons. If you're confused, or if you have any questions, then you can message me. So I'll see you again on our next meeting. So I will wait for the instruction whether we can have it as still online or face to face. But still, no, hadlok ang linog, especially if not a lecture on a higher building. Ha? So stay safe, everyone. That's it for this morning. Thank you for listening. Goodbye and good morning.
Thank you, Doc.
Thank you, Doc.
Bye.
Thank you po,
Thank you,
Doc.
Doc.